in some way, you can say that listening is about not just self-awareness, inner confidence, but also like self-love. Like you love yourself enough that you can put aside your ego for the moment, you can put aside trying to have to impress someone, just to kind of experience love and love all the information and all the feedback that's coming your way.
Welcome to Tribe Talk, where we alternate between current and next-gen changemakers to demonstrate that age doesn't impact the quality of one's work. I'm here today with Paul Spivey, principal at Phillips Oppenheim, which is an executive search and leadership advisory firm. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, listen, before we begin, I want to say that Tribe Talk is sponsored by Raise, a mobile-first platform powering individual activism, corporate giving, and nonprofit volunteerism. So download Raise on Google Play or the App Store to give, volunteer, and connect.
Tribe Talk is a streamer studio production. Stream your podcast, stream your story, stream yourself. Try it free at streamr.nyc. Make your voice, brand, and message seen and heard on every platform today.
Paul, I want to jump in with just your interest and passion because, as you mentioned earlier, you went to Wesleyan ages ago, went into finance, and now are helping out in the philanthropic sector. Can you tell me more about, in the early onset of your journey, what led you down this path?
Sure. So right out of college, I was a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, and while I was at Goldman, I was contributing to a program that had supported me in my education, and I was volunteering time, I was mentoring, and I was giving money each week. Not much, but the organization wasn't asking for money, and every week I gave $50, and it was just something out of discipline that I wanted to do. So even though my experience at Goldman Sachs was positive, what I recognized is that at a place like Goldman Sachs, you've got to love it, and it's got to be your whole life. And actually, I was deriving a lot of pleasure and satisfaction from being involved with this organization called Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, SEO. And as a result of giving money, I was asked to be on the board of SEO. So pretty much right out of college, I was serving on the board of this nonprofit organization, learning about governance, learning about what board members do, how board members can contribute, how board members kind of think about the larger issues of vision and strategy, how board members are financial stewards and how that's all important. And as I was serving on the board, there was a need for the executive director of the organization. And they asked me to become the executive director. So then I shift gears from being on the board to being an executive director. And the one thing that was really interesting about that experience was that when you're on the board, you think you understand what the executive director is doing. And you think that the executive director role isn't as challenging as it actually is. But when you have to implement strategy and run into all sorts of issues, et cetera, it can be quite complicated. So I had an opportunity to be an executive director early and kind of understand the difference in roles and kind of how there can be shared responsibility, shared power, how to partner effectively, how to operate with honesty and transparency, which is really, really important, so that when you're an executive director and you have a difficult decision to make and you think you might be making a mistake or you need support, that you can be open and share that with board members and not feel like you're going to be criticized or punished, but rather the board's going to work with you in partnership to achieve the mission.
Right. Well, that's fantastic. I feel like it is rare to speak with someone who's experienced both sides, and in the order that you did. I feel like typically people go the other way. How do you feel about the mindset or the kind of tools that you needed to use when being an effective board member versus being an effective executive director?
Yeah. So I think in both cases, both parties, the board, let's talk about a board chair and let's talk about a CEO. They both have to have understanding. They both have to see themselves as a partnership and willing to communicate effectively with one another. They both have to understand their roles and the clarity of the roles, that the CEO executes the strategy. The CEO makes things happen. And the board basically thinks of vision, but the CEO partners with the board to help with the vision and strategy. But if they have that, and if they have a shared role of responsibility and a shared sense of power, it can work effectively. What I have found sometimes, which can be a challenge with the board and the CEO, is that if, for example, the CEO feels uncomfortable communicating with a board member, or if the CEO doesn't have a mentor on the board, if the CEO doesn't understand the special norms of board meetings and kind of violates the norm, et cetera, it can be really different. It can be a real breakdown. That can be compounded if there's not like cultural alignment, where everybody has to make a special effort to really understand one another. It can be done, but you have to make a special effort if somebody didn't go to the same college you went to, didn't come up from the same community, isn't part of the same race as you, et cetera. That can be complicated. But what's really important is that there's communication. And what happens often is that when there's a mistake, when a CEO makes a mistake, if the CEO hasn't been communicating with the board, hasn't developed a trust with the board, maybe because the CEO hasn't made the effort to do that, but maybe because the board hasn't been open, what happens is the CEO loses, not the board. In terms of the shared role of responsibility, when there's not accountability, it's the CEO who always loses, not the board. The board has a different sense of accountability. I think that that's a problem in nonprofits.
Right, and what do you think they saw in you when you were first joining a board? Your pivot before, of course you're giving money and that's appreciated, but to go from giving money and volunteering to giving oversight, they were taking a chance on you.
Yeah.
And I think it turned out pretty well considering where you went.
Well, no, the board members can give wealth, wisdom, or work, kind of like the three W's, and not every board member has wealth, but every board member in a nonprofit organization should give something that's meaningful. I really believe that's important, and often funders won't fund an organization if they realize there's not 100% participation, 100% giving. But boards, they need younger people. They need people with different perspectives. You want to have a board where there are divergent views. When there are divergent views, you're going to get the best outcomes. If everybody comes from the same community, went to the same schools, et cetera, that generally is not good. We have examples of that in government. We have examples of that all over the place, that you need diversity of opinion. You need diversity in other ways too, socioeconomic and the like. But in opinions, it's really important. So have I answered your question?
Yeah, it seems like you more just had the confidence to understand your own opinion and how it blended into the group. There was a study that we just read at the start of the 20th century, actually, that a guy went into town and told people if you could guess the correct weight of his ox, you could keep it. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not familiar with this.
So anyways, everybody in the town takes a vote. And of course, nobody gets it right. What was very interesting was the average of all of the guesses came out almost exactly to the weight of the ox.
Wow. So
and they tried it again, same thing happened. It turns out that groupthink is way smarter than any individual.
That makes sense. That makes sense. One thing I wanted to add, based on the last comment that I made, is that there has to be a clear sense of expectations. Like sometimes people go on the board, this is going to be good for me, I'll be able to build relationships, or it's not going to be that demanding, et cetera. And the fact is that when you join a board, there should be real clear expectations that you can be evaluated on each year so you can determine whether you should stay on the board or not, that it's not just a given right. But board members, one, should make a financial contribution. Board members should attend meetings. They should become prepared to meetings. They should serve on committees. They should be an ambassador for the organization, and they should attend the gala, et cetera. And if there's clarity about what board members do, board members can be effective, because too often there are boards where there's an inner board, like 3 or 4 people that run everything and nobody else does anything. Or there's a person with a name who comes to the board, never, but just has a name. They can be on an advisory board. They don't need to take up a seat on a board where you can have somebody. So it's just really important for board members to have clear expectations and those expectations be met.
Right. Now tell me more. This very much blends into your experience at Phillips Oppenheim. Tell me more about the role that you play there in supporting boards.
So we do a lot of search work. We do some advisory leadership work as well. But in search, what I find is that it's really clear, it's really important for the board to be clear about what it wants. And for the board to be open as they're figuring out what they want, to change and to be influenced by others, but to have some clarity once they select a person. We will help them through that process to figure out how they're going to support the person. The job isn't done when you just select someone. What happens, in fact, is that if you think that the job is done, that person's going to fail because the person needs support of the board. So sometimes what will happen is that a board will say, "Oh, let's give the former chair, the last hurrah, and let that person chair the search committee." But the person's going to leave immediately after selecting the person. Well, that's unfair to the candidate who's been interviewed, has been developing a relationship with the person. The candidate wants to develop a bond with somebody, so that the role has to be taken very seriously about how to select someone. Also, during that process, when you find a candidate, in most searches, you're going to have 5 or 6 boxes, right? And you're going to fill out the boxes for the candidates, and you can say the candidate gets 5 of them, but not 6 of them. The 6th one the candidate doesn't get. How do you make certain once the candidate gets aboard that you support the candidate and you help the candidate through professional development get that 6th box? This is what's really tricky. Sometimes when there's sensitivity, and this happens with race, if you have a board that's predominantly white and you have a candidate that's of color, and the candidate has a weakness, just like everybody does, a lot of the board members will feel reluctant to let the candidate know about the weakness because they don't want to be perceived as being racist or something. And that just hurts everybody. It hurts the candidate, it hurts the board, et cetera. That's why there needs to be open conversations and building of trust and opportunity to develop that so that people can have open conversations about that. Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, I'm very lucky that Tribe's team is now a little over 60 people. And when we look at that, we recognize since we focused more on just quality work and effort, intention, ambition, we have an extremely diverse group.
Yeah, I saw.
It comes as an afterthought, a realization and acknowledgement. But when you have boards that are perhaps older and predominantly of a certain particularity, then they also have their own weaknesses and lacks. And perhaps when someone is new entering, it's hard to point that out as well.
Yeah, the generational differences.
So when you work in search for board and executive search, do you also still serve yourself on boards?
So, yes, I serve on boards, and sometimes I've served on the boards of a former client. They asked me afterwards to serve on the board, but while I'm doing a search, I'm not going to serve on the board because there's a conflict there. But yeah, there's so many different ways to help an organization. As a staff member, an executive, a volunteer, a board member, an advisory board member, what have you, and I very much am committed that once we help place somebody in the organization, that we help make certain that person can succeed. So what happens is after the placement, I'll speak with the person regularly, coach them and say, look, this is the board, this is how you're going to best be able to develop a relationship with them. This is one thing that's really key. I tell everybody that day one, you're going to an organization. This is not necessarily if you're a founder, if you're just starting, but you may have some of these issues if you're a founder. There are issues with regard to staffing. There are issues with regard to finance. There are issues with regard to finding a facility if you're a founder. All these things that come up, right? And what happens often is that a founder with all this energy winds up focusing on all of these things within the organization, but doesn't focus on the board because their time is spent here, and there seems to be one crisis after another. The problem with that, and I always tell a leader when you first start, make certain that you spend 30 to 50% of your time really building a relationship with each board member, finding out how they want to contribute, what they can contribute, where they can contribute best, and speak with them about what you're doing. Because what will happen is when you run into a problem down the line, everybody runs into problems. Every organization is going to run into problems. If you haven't communicated with the board and the board's not aware of that problem, the board might not be understanding and might not be receptive to kind of figure this out. Why didn't you tell me about this, et cetera? So I always say in the very beginning of an organization, whether you're just starting the organization, whether the organization is established, it's really important to develop those relationships. Success is all based on relationships. It's all based on communication and relationships.
Success is all based on relationships. Would you also say concurrently that relationships are what define work impact. That if you don't have a good relationship with them, how can you expect them to help you out?
Punto. Punto means period. I can't say it better than that. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, fantastic.
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I want to pivot and take it to before all of this, right? Even before college. I mean, when you were youth yourself, were you entrepreneurial in any way? Were you exploring this sphere? What were you up to?
Sure. So when I was younger, I was involved in school in leadership roles, and certainly in terms of government at high school and particularly in college. And I always thought that perhaps I'd want to run for a political office and everything. I thought that was like the best way to be kind of a leader. But I learned there's so many other ways and so many less painful ways to really be about leadership rather than in politics, where you really have to be about yourself and you really have to be kind of conniving and be aware of all the attacks from all different places. So I would say that I was entrepreneurial in the sense that when I saw an opportunity, like for example this organization that had helped me with my education, I said, I want to give money here. I want to contribute. I was a mentor. I developed a committee, for the first committee for the organization to approach alumni for money, et cetera. Yeah, that sounds like a common concept now, but back then it wasn't for this particular organization. So I would say kind of I was entrepreneurial that way. I said, I see no reason for not moving, even if I have to move by myself.
No reason for not moving, even if you have to move yourself.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Wow, so really from, I guess, in my head, government in school bodies and things of that nature is really community building, organizing, and understanding the needs and requirements of everybody inside so you can effectively support them. And that seems to best transfer over to your work now, where you are not only a great parent, but also with executive search and helping boards effectively run, you're making sure that they understand the needs of each other. And what about the needs of themselves? Do you do any work in that regard?
The organizations, the needs of themselves?
The individuals. How do you help them introspect and work on themselves?
Right, right. So what I do best is I try to lead by example in this regard, and that is I'm a Quaker, and I appreciate silence, and I think the best leaders are listening and learning leaders. And for example, when we're placing a candidate, et cetera, I'm listening to how well they listen. I'm listening to what they say, and particularly what they don't say. And I'm also listening to how I can help them in the process. Slow down, think about what they want to do, think about how it impacts others within the organizations, others in terms of achieving their goals, et cetera. And if somebody can do that, I mean, you need people who've got entrepreneurial energy, who are very high-strung, et cetera, but you also need people who can sit back and be reflective. And that's something that I look for very carefully in terms of candidates afterwards. Can you listen?
Right.
And listen effectively?
So the ability to know when to listen more so than when to speak.
At times, yeah, yeah.
If you were to put a ratio on that, would you say it's important to listen more than 50% of the time?
So the way I would do it is I would talk about it sequentially. I think it's important to listen first. Then, the ratio can change depending upon the situation. But if you're serving people, you want to listen to the people you're serving and listen to what they want, how they think they want it, and what's the best way. And if you do that, you can be a community leader. But if you're imposing your views immediately without listening to them, that's not effective, I don't think.
Right. Let's pivot to another thing that you mentioned prior, which is when people are starting an organization, how does listening play a part in what they do?
So this is really important because I think that founders, social entrepreneurs, are really exciting people. They're charismatic, they have energy, they have charisma, they've got lots of ideas, you can bounce off ideas. I think that's really, really exciting. And I think that you want to encourage that because that leads to dreams, and people need to dream out of the box to achieve things out of the box, and that's important. But I think that at some point it's important just to have someone in the organization or people who can complement you, people who are operational. And you wouldn't want necessarily to start an organization as an entrepreneur and hire 3 or 4 other people who are entrepreneurial like you. That probably wouldn't work well, because people have to run things, and entrepreneurs generally are better dreamers, ambassadors. They can inspire people, but they're not necessarily people who are going to be running the operational, idiosyncrasies of the organization. So I think it's important for founders in particular to know themselves and to know who best is going to support them and work with them. And that really goes to selecting a board too. Founders need to select board members, some who are more senior than them, who can bring expertise, and not to be intimidated by that, but to be encouraged by that. They need to bring people who have different perspectives, who, as we talked about earlier, divergent perspectives lead to better outcomes. And I think that is really key in terms of kind of how to move forward. So,
right. When you mention listening to people then internally, and you said an entrepreneur, a founder with so much charisma shouldn't hire just other entrepreneurs with so much charisma. So it sounds like you encourage them to listen to people outside of their personal scope, right, with different perspectives themselves.
Yes, and one thing I do want to mention with regard to the other point is that if a founder selects all the board members and they're all people who are deeply tied to the person, understandably, you want to get people who you trust, right, and you have a deep relationship with. But if everybody falls in that category, the problem is that a lot of founders will be with an organization for 3 or 5 years, and then they have to move on to find something else, to start something else. And if the board is entirely focused and expresses allegiance to the founder and only the founder, the next person who comes in is going to have an incredibly difficult time, because they'll go back to the founder and say, this person's doing this, et cetera, what do you think? Or they'll say, the founder wasn't doing it this way, et cetera. And that's why it's really important to have people of different perspectives on the board. And that's a mistake that founders make. It's a mistake that others make too, in terms of selecting board members, because really the board is key. I mean, a CEO is key, but the board really has the power, because the board can fire the CEO.
Right.
Yeah, the board. So it's really important to understand that, and to understand the role, and to do it effectively. Yeah. Right.
I think what's exciting is the moment you get a disagreement, it means an opportunity for growth.
True.
And so if you run out of disagreements, you're stagnating.
Punto. Yes, I agree. Absolutely. Yeah. People don't recognize that. When you're leading, and as a founder, you're so hyped in your idea, et cetera, and you just want to move forward, and you've got this path, and you've got this plan, you have this dream, and you've got the way that you're supposed to do it. So anybody who kind of interrupts that poses a challenge. Whereas a mature leader could say, wait a minute, let me just step back and kind of think about that. But I can understand how people who are revved up in their ideas have a hard time really balancing that.
Right. When you talk about listening internally, listening to your board, listening to the people you bring on at the start, what about for people before they have a board or others with them, when they're just thinking about wanting to do something? What encouragement do you give them when they're trying to listen?
So I think what's really important, and this goes particularly for founders and entrepreneurs, when you have an idea, generally it's the case that you're not the only person in the world that has that idea. Generally it's the case that somebody has tried it, somebody has failed, somebody has succeeded, somebody has tried a version of it, and it's really important to do the legwork and to find out about those programs first, to find out about what has worked and what hasn't worked, because that's going to help you. Right. And sometimes there's a sense of like ownership. This is my idea. No one else has it. I'm going to move forward. And it really is. It's never the case. Even as great an idea as it may be, there's somebody out there that's doing it or trying to do it.
So listen first, act second has been one of the themes that you've mentioned, not only internally with the board or with your other executives or with your teams, but also before you even start to other entrepreneurs out there.
It's called due diligence. Yeah. Listening is a skill that is so important, and yet it's so overlooked. For people to really just slow down, a lot of people are worried about what they're going to say next. So when they're hearing somebody talking, they're thinking about how to respond to that rather than really just understanding what's being said. And it's really important to be able to do that and do it effectively, especially if you're going to take the risk as a founder and entrepreneur. You're taking major risk. You're stopping whatever you're doing in your career. You haven't earned any money yet, et cetera. You're trying to get people to invest in you, et cetera. There's a lot of risk. So you better listen.
You certainly better listen.
Yeah.
Well, I love that, especially, I feel like there's a confusion when people don't actively listen, or they hear you, but they don't listen to you. And you're right, a lot of the times it's building the next phrase in their head for how they respond best. It's a selfish move to try and say, how do I sound best? And perhaps the quality of a great leader to ask, how do I make this person sound great?
Yeah, so as you were talking, I was slowing down, making certain that I hear what you say, and I think that in some way, you can say that listening is about not just self-awareness, inner confidence, but also like self-love. Like, you love yourself enough that you can put aside your ego for the moment. You can put aside trying to have to impress someone, just to kind of experience love and love all the information and all the feedback that's coming your way. And I think if you kind of operate, I mean, it may sound corny, but if you kind of operate with that sense of love, because what you're trying to do through your nonprofit most likely is to spread love and to impact others in a positive way, to change their lives. And when it comes to love, nobody wants to rush into love. You want to think about it. You want to absorb it. You want to, be emotionally engaged. You want to marry love, right? So that's what I would say. Think about it that way.
Right. You're reminding me of a story I heard. There's a common phrase that teachers learn more about the subject than when they were just studying it. Right? When you teach something, you learn more about it, but that doesn't mean that it's the act of speaking. It's more the act of hearing new questions and the advice or insight of others. And the same thing, every time you're talking, you're just spewing out what you already know, instead of taking a moment to enjoy that we can keep learning.
That's really good. My wife's a teacher, and she focuses on inquiry-based learning. And it's really about getting the students to control their thoughts and the class, and to develop the questions that are relevant to them and how to make it relevant to life. And what she does is basically, she, in kind of a conventional way, stops teaching and allows them to teach others, and just kind of facilitates this. And it works really well, because there's a sense of ownership, and the kids can be very analytical with each other, and they can challenge each other, and it's done very effectively.
Incredible.
Yeah.
What year or how old are her students?
So she now works with immigrant students who are working on their GED. So the students are the high school age, the older high school age, between like 17 and 20 or so. But it can be done. She's done it at younger ages as well.
So there's no barrier to someone being able to do that too?
No, not at all. And students, they want to talk. They want to be in touch with themselves and their ideas. They don't want to be told things. They want to help tell things.
Yeah. I think the best way that I've ever worked with someone is we'd have a conversation.
Right.
And I'd propose an idea, and they'd be like, amazing idea. It's already in motion. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they were seeding a way for me to say the idea so that I could feel in the moment like I'd come up with it, because then I appreciated it more perhaps, or was more inspired by it. But in reality, I felt so grateful that they had taken more time to help someone else learn of the same solution. And I really want to make sure that that same method is shared to others, where if others come up with the same idea you have, you should not say, well, I had the idea first. You should say, that is a wonderful idea.
Build upon it. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. It can cause you to think further and to build upon it and to complement one another's. Yeah. So there's a lot of beauty in that. Yeah.
In general, you spent a lot of this time sharing insights that you've learned. and very little perhaps boasting about your own successes, which I really appreciate. I mean, at the start of this, you said it is more important to listen and share, right? And so I hope that I'm just picking it up on my own, that I'm trying to learn from that, and also for everybody listening, that you are quite effective at making sure that the impact is the focus, not the individual.
Totally, because I've seen organizations that are run by individuals who are focused on themselves, and generally that becomes a problem. They get in the way of achieving things for the community. And not that a leader has to be completely selfless, because leaders have to have some ego, but they just need to be able to put the ego in perspective when they're dealing with board members, when they're dealing with the communities they're serving, especially when they're dealing with the communities they're serving, because that's where you really have to listen. How are you going to serve the communities if you don't understand what they want, if you're just giving them something they don't need?
Right.
You have to be able to listen effectively. You have to be able to understand. If somebody seems less educated than you in terms of traditional education, they may be far more educated than you in terms of living a life, in terms of the challenges that they've had to overcome, and to be able to listen carefully and kind of understand that and to move forward. Yeah.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your wisdom and experience, let alone expertise in the board sector of how an organization runs, both for-profit, non-profit, across the scope. But also thank you for coming and sharing your compassion and kindness with us. It's really clear that you're an effective executive searcher because you know exactly the qualities that you've embodied yourself. And when you're looking for someone who has the right mindset and mentality and then can fit into a group, I think it is a comfort that someone like yourself is doing the looking.
Well, thank you. I mean, I always look at opportunities to talk as learning opportunities, and certainly have learned from you, and definitely commend the work that you're doing and the difference that you're trying to make. So thank you for that, and thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Tribe Talk is a Streamer Studio production. Try Streamer free at streamr.nyc. Executive producer David Walters, videography and editing by David Walters, graphic design by Tristan Bresnan, music by Benjamin Senmana, hosted by Kyle Mathis. Tribe, taking root today to advance tomorrow.